Hey everyone, welcome to our Zoom session and Q&A, How to Negotiate Strategically with Patricia, Lynn, CCIM. We're super excited to spend some time with you today. We've got a lot of great content and a lot of ground to cover. As you're jumping in this morning, do us a favor and in the chat box, let us know where you're from. This training is presented by the Merced County Association of Realtors Commercial Committee. Our focus is finding ways to add value, and our mission is to equip people with the tools and information they need to help them grow their business. One of the ways that we're doing that during shelter in place is by using Zoom, because we can see each other and connect safely from your home or office. We're going to be hosting these Zoom calls every month on the third Wednesday until September. So if this training brings you value, be sure and plan to be with us again next month and look for more details about that event coming soon. I want to say thank you to our partners, the CCIM Institute, CCIM Northern California Chapter, the Arcadia Association of Realtors, Exceed CE, Crexi, and also Link Strategies. Every one of our partners has contributed to making this event and future events happen. We couldn't do it without them. My name is Dan Del Real. I'll be one of your hosts today. I'm a real estate agent with Coldwell Banker, Ganella Realty, and Merced. I have a background as an executive in corporate America, working for Fortune 100 companies. I love coffee, technology, and also creating content. Today, I'm excited to introduce our speaker, Patricia Lynn, who I first met circa 2005 when she was my instructor for CCIM CI 104 investment analysis for commercial real estate. Patricia is a consultant in corporate real estate with business and government officials all around the world. She advises utility companies, brokerage firms, and coaches individuals. She started in Central California as a commercial broker, moved early in her career to San Francisco, worked for several national brokerage firms disposing of large San Francisco office buildings, and also headed an auction disposition team for a West Coast division of a national firm. She was a senior director for Price Waterhouse, advising corporations and government agencies before founding her own consulting firm. She also owns an online continuing education company for real estate agents. She's an award-winning senior instructor for the CCIM Institute. She's also a coffee enthusiast and holds a black belt in karate. Patricia, welcome to the call. We're excited to hear from you today.
Dan, thanks so much. I am super excited to be here. Just for all of your information, we have about 80 people on this call, so we're really looking forward to delivering good message for you and making it worth your time. We call this session How to Negotiate Strategically. And we'll have a Q&A at the end, and I'll go over the details of the agenda in a minute. But I also like to call this, and I am having trouble, there we go. Also like to call this, How to Get What You Need and Sustain Long-Term Relationships. A reasoning for that focus is that I assume all of you here are in the real estate industry, and the real estate world as a very small world, and you run into the same people over and over again. And also, you're looking for sustaining long-term relationships with your clients, because that's the key to gaining the competitive edge here. So we want to focus here, and our program is focused on not the one-off negotiating, I like to say, for chopsticks in China, but for the kind of negotiating strategy that you use to sustain the long-term relationships. So with that, Dan, you ready to go?
Ready to go.
All right, let's go. So housekeeping, a little bit of housekeeping. We've got you set on mute. We're going to have a Q&A session, and the timing will be about roughly 50%, 45 to 50% content, and then the rest of that question and answer. use the chat box. We're monitoring it. Those of you who may have been in a course of mine know that my style is very casual. I like to leave room for a lot of interaction and having everyone have fun. So that's why the enjoy is there. So with that being said, let's start with a poll. And you all negotiate every day. So we'd like you to just click in here. Are you seeing the poll? Can you give me a thumbs up if you see the poll? All right, awesome. Okay, thanks, Kevin. So go ahead and enter into the poll who you're negotiating with, or who gives you the most difficult issues in negotiations. Oh, and by the way, this is, nobody can see who's providing what answers. I wanted to say that. So at this point, we have about half of you who have responded. And the responses coming in are super interesting. We've got maybe 60%. So if you haven't responded to the poll and want to jot in there your input. Few more of you, please. There we go. So Dan, what do you think is the most agreed upon answer here, or input?
It's pretty close. The thing that stands out is, you know, children seems to be ranking pretty high, which kind of makes sense because of shelter in place.
Right, right. Yeah, and the current situation will impact our input now. But thank you. So with maybe 2/3 of you having responded, here's what we found. Other brokers, 25%. Other brokers, buyers and sellers, and children are all about the same response at 25%. Not too much trouble with contractors or vendors, in fact, none at all. Lenders, we had one response on that, and spouses and significant others, thank goodness they're not as problematic as children are. Oh, and let's see, buyers and sellers tipped the odds now with one more in. So the reason for this is for us launching this poll. Here we go. Let me share the results with you. Can you see that? Give me a thumbs up if you can. Yeah, okay. Kevin, you're the man. You're right at the top of the list. So thank you for the input. Here are the results. And the reason for this poll is not just to get you involved and see if you're here with us, but the reason for this is to say that this process that we're going to talk about works for anyone. It's not just for real estate. So you will find that if you think about approaching even the non-real estate situations with the process that we're going to talk about, discuss here, preview for you, you will find that it might even work there. So that's good news. Negotiations as we see them, typically a tug of war, a game of chicken, a winner, a loser, a zero-sum game, one party employing tactics to knock the other one off of center so that we can get what we want. And even those of us who consider ourselves a win-win negotiator, often there's this approach of, well, yeah, you know, it was a win-win negotiation, but, you know, I really did a great job. So, let's see, there we go. So, negotiations as we see them. I'd like to talk about a little bit of a different perspective and have you view the negotiations from a bit of a different viewpoint. And in this time, I've been very curious about what's being said about how people are dealing with the shelter-in-place situation. So I've been doing some readings on on some of the ancient philosophers, and there's a lot right now out from the Stoics, who their philosophy was generated about 3rd century BC, and their approach to dealing with the hardships of the world. Marcus Aurelius was one, Seneca was another. There were several that are still being read today by world leaders. And their approach to dealing with the hardships of the world is that we don't have the choice of what happens to us, but we do have the choice of how to do with it. Little bit more recently, a quote by Viktor Frankl, every human being has the freedom to change at any instant. So what I'd like to say with regard to this is, if we can take off that hat of how we viewed negotiations in the past and be open to a different perspective, then this might be useful for us in dealing with any of those groups, those basic food groups that we negotiate with. So that by way of introduction. Agenda for this, we're going to address the challenges and the opportunities out there right now, and generally out there, and how we've evolved the approach that we have to negotiations. We also are going to talk about the CCIM 3-step negotiation process. Background on that is that the CCIM Institute, which I assume most of you are familiar with, went out several years ago to look for a negotiations program. And we found one that came out of the Harvard Negotiation School and the win-win philosophy of negotiating. And we brought that into our program, and we incorporated into the upper division courses, CI 103 and CI 104. And why we like it is that we're a quant organization. We deal with analysis. And so we like it because it is 3 distinct steps that you can apply any negotiation to. So we're going to be giving you an overview of that negotiation process by way of advertising that we'll be putting on a full day course in September, given the travel gods are with us. So that's the negotiation process, and then we're going to be dealing with some Q&A. So we're going to be learning a proven methodology for implementing best practices, trying to apply them in a disciplined approach. In your chat windows, if you will, what kind of, aside from who you're negotiating with, what kind of negotiations are keeping you awake at night? I'm looking over here at the chat window. Reason for this is that this will help us with trying to address our content to meet your needs. Okay, we've got business partnerships. Hi, Sue. COVID rent concessions, commissions. I see it, commissions. Yeah. Terms of contracts. Offer terms, how to make an offer, initial offer. How do I avoid a seller lowballing your commission? Listing prices, repairs when needs. These are great. These are terrific. So Dan, let's keep that in mind, and everyone keep this in mind as we go through our process. Seller setting a good price. Oh, this is fodder for so much more content. Agents who don't bother to advise their clients, simply parrot their clients. Oh yeah, unreasonable and emotional responses. It's like boxing with a phantom. I love that. Breaching contract. Okay, so aside from those challenges, here are a few of the current challenges that we're facing out there just in general. Our clients, because they're much more sophisticated, they have access to all kinds of information. Now, in their minds, they don't appreciate the value that we might bring. That translates into cutting fees. Anybody deal with very complex negotiations with lots of players? I know on the corporate real estate side, decision-making is a component of everyone holding hands and making sure that they're in agreement. Non-monetary issues that might be as even more important. And you'll see this today, especially during the COVID-19 situation, where companies are stepping up that normally would be associated with profit only and making this about serving their community and their clients. And anybody ever deal with a difficult negotiator? You can say yes or no. I see a few smiles there. Yeah. Non-monetary issues, corporate policy, even, I'm going to give a few examples here. Even before we were dealing with the current situation, corporations for the last 10 to 15 years have been moving toward work at home, work in a third place, how to set the policy toward that. We do a lot of work when we deal with corporations. We do a lot of work on space management and how to determine who sits where and who sits next to whom and what the policies are around that. The other issue, huge issue in corporate America, and probably in your negotiations too, when you have multiple parties, is consensus. And you can see in the little flow chart here, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek because we say test for consensus and there's no line over to the right. That was by design, just to show how often consensus is not thought about in a corporate situation. So everyone in companies needs to be on board. A great example of this is in project management for projects and companies. I've seen as high as 10% of a project budget dedicated to change management, which means this is how we make sure that we bring everyone along so that there's agreement, so moves are much more efficient. Difficult negotiators, this could be anything from literally speaking a different language to what was that Mars and Venus book a few years ago, speaking and not really understanding or listening or hearing what the other person is saying. I love this one, Difficult Negotiators. Another book, Winning Through Intimidation. They talked about the ways that negotiators can steal your chips. This was the first way that a negotiator could steal your chips was they could not intend to steal your chips, say they weren't going to steal your chips, but then they couldn't help it, end up stealing your chips. This was the third way that negotiators could steal your chips, which is I'm not going to steal your chips, but the baseball bat behind them, every intention of stealing the chips. So difficult negotiators pose a challenge for us as well. So out of all of these challenges that exist right now, there are some opportunities, and our model has developed out of these opportunities. And most of it is that we have tools that help us keep organized when the negotiations are too complex. We use data, and we have ways to build consensus. How exciting is that? Are you guys as excited as I am? Okay. So the other element of this is that we can't control the outcomes because people are involved. But what we can do is we can take control of and drive the entire process and drive the dialogue. And by doing that, we have an opportunity to influence the outcome. So in terms of how you measure success in a negotiation, is it winning? Is it comparing your outcome to somebody else's? Well, I got that deal at 10 bucks a square foot and you could only get it at 15 bucks a square foot. Is it avoiding conflict? You know, people say, well, how about compromising? And you have to have some conflict. You have to invite some to find out where the issues are. We like this choice, which is assessing your outcomes against your internal goals. In other words, we need to have an objective for the negotiation, and then how did we do as compared to that objective. So here are the ways or styles that people have with regard to negotiations. A lot of people are focused on the relationship mode. This is a long-term business. It's all about relationships. It reminds me of one of my early colleagues who said, you know, I got the listing, but they beat down the commission to, you know, I guess I can't discuss actual percentages, but they got the commission down really low, but they told me that they'll list their next property with me at full commission. So how long did she last in the business? Not very, because it was all about the relationship. The other side over on the right is the substance mode, the more competitive, winner take all. So we tend to say that, well, you know, the key to the best negotiation is a compromise. And what we say is that compromising damages relationships. And we want to focus on what we call this win zone, the CCIM win zone, by expanding that using creativity. And so by understanding their needs and our needs, we expand the win zone and avoid just a compromise. All right. So time check. Dan has made me promise to finish this by halfway through, and I'm talking as fast as I've ever talked. So we're going to go maybe another 10 minutes or so with the content before we open this up to questions. So as we're starting to talk about this, be keeping in mind a negotiation that you're currently involved with. All right, you may have read the orange story. Two sisters, they're fighting over the last orange in the house. Becky and Melissa both want the orange. Mother comes home and the kids are screaming at each other, and boy, does this sound familiar now. And she says, you know what, I'm just gonna cut the orange in half and I'm gonna compromise and give you each half. Well, later on we find out that Becky's not happy because she just wanted to eat the fruit of the orange and she didn't get all she needed. Because Melissa's not happy either, all she wanted was the orange zest to make a cake. So if Mother had listened to their needs, she could have created a situation where you didn't have to split and compromise. Simple example, but planting a seed for ways we think about our deals. Okay, I have a property, $10 million. It is the best location. It's high traffic, and you can build a great property on this. So Dan, can you make me an offer? 10 million, and that's a steal.
You know, that's way over budget. I'll give you 2 million for that property.
2 million. Well, look, you've been a friend for a long time. I've known you since 2005. Hard to believe. For you, just today, I'll sell it to you for 9 million. That's a steal. I mean, that's really a steal.
That's still way over budget. It'd be really hard for me to offer more, but you know, I'm willing to work with you, and I could do 3 million.
Oh, really? Oh, Dan, you're killing me. Yeah, you're killing me. Okay, you know, just for purpose of this exercise and this webinar and you know, face and all that, I'll go down to 7.
Man, this is really awkward, but really the most I could do is 4 million. I don't have, I can't go any higher than that.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I got to walk away from this. So, okay, I thought about it a little bit. You know, I'm not going to pull the we're only a commission apart, because we're a lot further apart than that. So 6 million.
You know, I could do, how about 5 million?
5. You know what? You're really a tough negotiator, but why don't we split the difference and make a deal at 5.5? How's that sound?
Sounds good.
Okay, everyone, what do you think? Does that sound like a typical negotiation? Yes, no? Go ahead and chat. He could do more. Yeah, that's what I thought. Anybody else? Okay, so here's the problem with that. Couple of things. First of all, it's a bit of a battle of wills, right? You know, Dan chatted separately to me, man, I'm never going to negotiate with you again. And, you know, it damages relationships. You know, I don't know about you, Dan, but I'm exhausted. I mean, that was really hard work. And we didn't get at certain issues as it relates to why, you know, as it relates to anything behind that. The other thing is that I haven't posted it here, but it makes a liar out of you. Okay? You know, you start at this and you can say, oh, it's just a negotiation. But if I start at 10 and you know I'm going to come down to 5.5, where's my credibility in that? Yeah, that's the way everybody negotiates, that tug of war. But what we've done here is we've done a classic high-low game, which is really just a battle of wills, a game of chicken. And, you know, which each side calculates whether to hold an unreasonable position or cave in. So, so what's the way out of this? What's the way out of this high-low back and forth game? Anybody? Here's where I'd love your input. How do you get out of this back and forth? There's a question you can ask with, it's just one word, 3 letters. Tony, you got it. You got it, my man. All right, it's that question of why. No, Dan said early on, well, that's above my budget. My budget doesn't accommodate that. And we don't know why his budget is, ultimately at that 5.5 million. He could have another property that's going under that he needs to feed, and he has a bottom line in that. He could need the proceeds to deal with a relative who needs an operation, for example. And each one of those reasons gives us fodder for coming up with some creative solutions. So great. So yeah, spend time understanding the other side, find out exactly what he needs. And I've been negotiating for a long time, and I find when I coach brokers that often the deals, offers, and counteroffers are flying back and forth across the wires or the ether, and nobody's sitting down and asking that question and trying to get in front of the people and ask the question why. So out of this and all of this buildup, we have basic premise for our program, which is people make decisions based on their own interests. You will rarely find a decision made against someone's own interest unless they don't have full capacity. Even in tough decisions that people make, it somehow is in their interest. So the way to find creative, effective solutions is to satisfy those interests. And then we also must understand how not doing the deal, if you will, satisfies or harms all of your interests before we go back to where our negotiating is going to be. So this leads into the CCIM 3-step negotiating process. And those 3 steps are, and we lay this out in our full program, who's involved, how can we satisfy their needs, and what happens if there's no agreement. So it looks a little like this. You can see assumptions and then steps. The 3 steps are based directly on our assumptions, and right in the middle are the tools. Remember, I said that we like the quantitative process-oriented tools. Those are the tools that we use in our program to come up with solutions. So here they are. Last one being risk analysis. We're going to do a quick overview of step 1 in this program, and I think that this is the most important fundamental basic thing that you can do in understanding and setting yourself up to control the process for a negotiation. I use this all of the time, sometimes in my head, sometimes I have to get a whiteboard out in front of the clients, but I use it literally whenever Lost in Space is back out again. And danger, Will Robinson. Maybe some of you are old enough to remember that, or see the new version. It's awesome. But whenever that danger, Will Robinson comes up, I automatically go to this step 1. And that is a stakeholder interest chart. So what a stakeholder interest chart looks like is you identify the stakeholders. Oh, let me go back. You identify the stakeholders across the top. You identify the issues that they're dealing with. And then in the center of the chart, you address their interests. We'll give you a quick example. This is a true case. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. Florida farms, people that I worked with, family owned. They had a farming operation. They had been offered $500 million for their property. So they asked me to help them find a developer and negotiate a joint venture agreement. We got to the point where we'd identified the developer and had spent up to about $500,000 in legal fees negotiating the joint venture agreement. Primary issue was who had decision-making control. After everything else was addressed, it was who had decision-making control. And once again, that I word, we had an impasse. So we looked at the stakeholder interest chart and we said, maybe by just backing up, slowing down, and using this tool, we can help to see if we can come to some consensus. So here are the stakeholders. The first three were the family members. The last was obviously the developer. Here were their issues. Key one being decision control. They also wanted to leave a legacy to their community of having something that they could be proud of that represented their family history and contributions to the community. So then we completed their interest. And when you work with an interest chart, and I'm going to ask you to take a screenshot of the next blank one so that you can use this for yourself. But when you work with an interest chart, you take each issue and you work across the chart and you say, with regard to decision control, how does Susan feel about it? Well, she wants veto power. How does the developer feel about it? Well, he wants absolute control. No family's going to be getting in the middle of my ability to move quickly. So we work across the top, across the row for each issue. Profit, everybody's pretty much in agreement on profit. Project aesthetics, pretty much in agreement. William was the farmer, and so he was more concerned with the farming operations and not the aesthetics, but he was heavy on the profit. Developer fee, there we go. So what you find when you develop an interest chart like this is that there are many areas where the stakeholders are in alignment. Green means agree, purple means don't necessarily agree but support. And so you'll find on all of these issues that there were only two where we had disagreement. So we could take and use language that built on areas where there was agreement to start to get consensus in this negotiation. So we spent a lot of time on these interest charts. Like I said, when I hear the danger, I immediately go to, okay, get out of my head and what I'm thinking about and think about them and what they need. Because one thing about interests is interests are not negotiable. Positions are negotiable, but someone will not negotiate off of their basic interests. Take a screenshot, a picture of this if you want to. I would encourage you, and if you want to email me at the end of this, I'll send you a blank interest chart. I've done this with Excel. There's your stakeholder interest chart. And for your problematic negotiation, think about that. Also, I'm happy to just, if you want to shoot me some questions later about this, I'm happy to help you get organized for using this. Positions versus interest. Positions are the peak or tip of the iceberg. And interest, if you can see this, I love this. Positions, price versus price. Interest, the little fishies are saying, sigh. If only he'd look down here and ask the question why about our interest. So beginning negotiators negotiate positions: price, time. Experienced negotiators get under that tip of the iceberg and negotiate interest. Questions right now? Anybody? Okay, so our three-step process starts with that interest chart. Who is involved, and really taking a deep look under the tip of the iceberg at what they need. Our second step is how we take those interests and creatively expand the pie of that orange or that baseball diamond, so that we can come up with what we call an accretive negotiation rather than a distributive, where we have a zero-sum game and just split the pie. We can actually make that pie bigger by digging a little deeper in. And then the third one is our risk analysis. It's the analysis of what happens if there's no resolution. And I'll give you a tiny bit of insight into that. Is we're deal makers. If you go in the real estate industry, anything less than 90% of your deals, you see it as failure. When you go in the corporate side, I've spent a lot of time inside of corporations, and I would say maybe 20% of the deals that I worked on had some resolution. But most of you here are deal makers, and so we don't like to look at the idea of there not being a deal. And so we tend to not address deeply what happens if there's no resolution. So we have a format for that risk analysis that actually drives us back into what could happen. It ranges from walk away, bad mouth, lawsuit. We have to go to the darkest places if you're dealing with this on a global level. Nuclear options. We go to the highest amount of least likely option but highest risk, and we take a look at all those before we go back into the negotiation and set our bottom line. So that's our process, and you got semi-deep into step one, an overview of steps 2 and 3. Now, Dan, let's unmute and let's deal with some questions. So, Ruiz?
Taking some screenshots.
Okay. And why don't you all, so we've unmuted you so that you can talk, but why don't you all separately put your mute buttons on, and then when you want to ask a question, go ahead and unmute yourself. Let's go ahead and everybody find mute and set the mute. All right. How to make it as close to a situation where everyone meets their needs. So, Russ, is that something you want to expand on, that question?
At 1:30. I'm gonna show up at 1, and then I'm gonna look at what the
To try and pay it off.
yeah, so 1:30.
Okay, I couldn't hear that well, but what I'm assuming this is a question, how to make.
They got you doubting your schedule?
Huh? No, it's because I originally worked today at
Oh. If you want us to unmute you, and then we'll go ahead and do that. How to make it as close to a situation where everyone meets their needs. So this gets into going back to that interest chart and pulling out from everyone what their true needs are. And the best negotiators that I've ever seen and have been, we say, everybody, attorneys get a bad rap. Well, they're, people from my brokerage background always used to say, well, deal killers. But some of the best negotiating situations I've ever seen have been attorneys. And one early in my career, I went into a big deal for me at the time, and we were negotiating with a car dealer. At the end of that, I said to one of my mentors, wow, that went really smooth. And the process was just very calm, and let's deal with all these areas where we have agreement, and then set aside a parking lot of lists to address, and discussing. So now how can we go ahead and find some kind of creative solution on each of these? So Russ, it's not simple, or it's not easy, but it's if you go back to the process of really getting at their interests, you have a better chance of starting to get everybody as close to their needs met as possible. Somebody else? Okay.
Hey, Patricia, there was a couple of questions from Jeffrey Shaddy and Ranjit Singh.
Okay.
We're both asked.
Oh, great. Okay. Yep, I see that. Super. Yeah, those are great questions. Yeah, one word: education. Whenever I have a situation where I'm not getting what I want, and remember, step 2 is how to get them what they want, and the subset of that is so we can get what we want. Whenever I'm not getting what I want, I am looking to myself to say, how did I do with regard to educating them? And so, the real estate industry, once you pass the test, unfortunately has a pretty low barrier to entry. So you're going to be dealing with inexperienced agents. And I dealt with them in the year or two right out of college when I was in residential real estate, to all of my time in commercial real estate, to my time as a consultant. You deal with various levels of experience. So the first thing that you can do, if you don't know off the bat that they're inexperienced, is try to get a sense of background, a sense of experience level. And then with regard to, once you know, and sometimes it's obvious, like you might see a offering memorandum come across, or information about property that's obviously overpriced. And they just took the listing. And so you have a conversation about that. Again, why? Why is it priced that way? So you just get underneath the surface and mostly try to educate them. Jeffrey and Rajiv, did that help? Okay, let's see here. Seller is talking around the subject. How do you bring them back into subject without upsetting them as you're trying to access their needs, but the seller is not willing to give up information? So, Jean, I would ask, how much of a seller is the seller? Or is this a cold call? Is this an actual an actual, yes, we want to sell the property, but we can't give you anything. And one of the, I do some coaching of brokers, want to start a new area of the business and go from A to Z, and have had some good success with that. And one of the hardest challenges was to have everybody have an understanding and have the broker be willing to hold firm about the hard questions about getting information. And so again, that comes back to education. So when you're dealing with a seller and let's say that they're a real seller, you have to hold your power as to what makes you good. And this also answers the cut the commission question as well, is look, we are successful because we do a thorough job of underwriting. And if you want your product, which is the information about your property, to have credibility in the marketplace, we have to have good background behind it. Now, we won't give that information unless a confidentiality agreement is signed, unless you're concerned about that, in case you're concerned about that. But you have to have credibility in the marketplace, or it's going to impact the saleability of your listing. So I hope that's helpful with regard to that. Let's see. Yes, Sue, and remind the other side of the consequences. That's your step 3, Sue, of if the deal is not successful. That could be shop-worn property, for example. Let's see here. I know, Tony, you wanted to deal with COVID, and that's on the top of many people's minds right now. I have a few clients that I've been helping with that. In some situations, they've been successful. In some, they've met with some success, but not as much as their goal was. And what I have advised them of is to go back to trying to get at the interest, number one, that of the owners of the property, and number 3, that step 3 of what are the consequences ultimately. And that doesn't mean I'm going to file bankruptcy if you don't, lower the rent. That means let's sit down. It's not a threat. It's a let's sit down and let's lay out all the possible consequences and get out of the game of chicken and see if we can come to some workable solution. It's a really deep topic right now. And with all of the questions, I would say come back to, especially once you've had more insight into steps 2 and 3, that COVID rent concession question could be resolved around steps 2, which are what are some creative solutions to the issue of the rent payment. In California, we have a different, I believe our laws are different with regard to rent forgiveness than in some of the other states. But as I understand right now, the way that the regulations and the laws are, you have to pay back immediately after that grace period. So there's got to be, which is not acceptable to many. So there's got to be some creative solution to be looking at, and that's a whole nother hour. But go back to the process. Let's see. Okay, Sue, you had an unsuccessful negotiation that went south, but you have to work with them in another business. Happens all the time. So again, it's a relationship. If you can go back to the philosophy of the Stoics and keep the emotion out of the situation, even though in the past it may have been emotional, and have an opportunity to say, hey, this is what happened. Let's start from here, and maybe even sit down and address what the issues were, because, we're all in a relationship business. Yeah. Okay, Erin, that's a great question because we have it. How do you deal with a person who doesn't mind burning bridges because they see the situation as a one-time negotiation, might be in different markets, and has an outsized view of their leverage? So in that, speaking at a high level, 10,000 feet instead of getting into the details of the circumstances, in different markets. So you can go back to that why question, and perhaps some education. Okay, yes, I know that you don't mind burning these bridges, or that you got a tough seller or buyer, but let's get at, can we just talk about the facts and the market on this? And then the outside view of their leverage is really a question of the risk analysis. And that's a fun segment. I have 4 minutes, so I'm gonna tell you a quick story about number 3, risk analysis, and pointing out the consequence of no agreement. And that is, watch one of the YouTube videos on Steve Jobs' last presentation to the Cupertino City Council in getting the new spaceship building headquarters for Apple approved. He did a great job of helping them to understand respectfully the consequence of not doing the deal. Taught to ask the agent what's important. Good. Yeah, the text issue is difficult. Sometimes you just have to assess your power, and insist on a conversation. Representing buyer, seller, agent had take price or cancel. Again, same thing, Sean. Is we have a legitimate offer here, and we need to sit down. I know that sounds simple. Sometimes it's not that simple, but I keep trying. Okay, good, Sue. All right, what's next? Take a quick screen cap or shot of this. Just some readings I put together. The top ones are fun. The bottom ones are more informational, or I can send this to you. The what's next. Dan, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we are going to, if you found value in some of the concepts and information we went over today, Patricia is going to be doing a deeper dive and teaching a one-day course, CCIM Commercial Real Estate Negotiations. That's going to be September 16th, 2020. It's going to be hosted at the Merced County Association of Realtors. There are, if you're working towards a CCIM designation, or also, if you're looking for California DRE continuing education credits, the course does meet that requirement. There's the normal pricing is $295. I just got an email this morning about a virtual course that's being offered for $275. Right now, for the month of May, we're offering special discounted pricing at $199. We have 10 of those available, and the pricing goes away at the end of May, whichever comes first. And so just want to encourage you and let you know you're going to get an email with more information about that. So if you're interested, that's an upcoming event. I just want to say thank you to everyone who attended. Look for that email with information about the negotiations course offering, and then also some more information about next month's event. And we'd also love to hear from you. Let us know how we did today, or if there's any topics you'd like us to cover for future sessions. And then Patricia, how do people find you online or get a hold of you?
You bet. Thank you, Dan. At my email address, Patricia Link Strategies. Also, I'm going to make a shameless promotion for Exceed CE. We have continuing education for in several states. We have CE in California, Washington, Oregon, and about 10 more, but also Missouri. And it has some of a commercial orientation if you're interested and need license renewal credits. Again, shameless, like I said, but thank you. I really appreciate your time. We hope it was valuable to you, and we're at 11:01, so let's close this off. And thanks again, everyone. That was fun. Okay. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Patricia.
Let's go
Thank you,
ahead.
everybody.
Yes, be safe. And go forth and prosper.